first African-American poet laureate of Washington, D.C., who was a longtime professor at Howard University, Sterling Brown, once wrote these words in the poem, Old Lem. He writes, I talked to Old Lem, and Old Lem said, they weigh the cotton, they store the corn, we only good enough to work the roads, they run the commissary, they keep the books, we gotta be grateful for being cheated. Whippersnapper clerks call us out our names, we gotta say Mr. to swindling boys. They make our fingers turn somersets. We buck in the middle, say thank you, sir. They don't come by ones, they don't come by twos, but they come by tens. They got the judges, they got the lawyers, they got the jury rolls, they got the law. They don't come by ones. They got the sheriffs. They got the deputies. They don't come by twos. They got the shotguns. They got the rope. We get the justice. And in the end, they come by tens. Their fists stay closed. Their eyes look straight. Our hands stay open. Our eyes must fall. They don't come by ones. They got the manhood. They got the courage. We gotta stick around. Hang tag hounds. They burn us when we dogs. They burn us when we men. They come by tens. I had a buddy once, 6 foot of a man, muscled up to perfection, game to the heart. They don't come by ones. Outworked and outfought. Men, they don't come by twos. He spoke out at the commissary. They came to get him. They gave him a day to get out of the county. He said he didn't take it. He said, come and get me. They came and got him. And they came by 10. They don't come by ones, they don't come by twos, but they come by tens. Welcome to the remembrance of Joseph McCoy, who was lynched in this very city in 1897 on this day. We thank you for taking time out of your day to call for not only remembrance, but hopefully for reconciliation. For just a brief moment, I would like to recognize all of the steering committee officials for the Alexandria, not only planning committee, but for the Alexandria Remembrance Project community. If all steering committee members could please stand. Friends, now it is my pleasure to introduce the leader of this city, one who demonstrates leadership by simply showing up. The mayor of the city of Alexandria, Justin Wilson.
Thank you, Reverend Q. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for being here on an amazing day here this afternoon in Alexandria. I want to introduce a number of folks and then say a few words, and then I have a proclamation to present. So first of all, I want to introduce all of my colleagues from the City Council who are here. First of all, we have Vice Mayor Amy Jackson up front. Council Member Kanika Gearing. Councilmember Sarah Bagley. Councilmember Kirk McPike. Councilwoman Aaliyah Gaskins. Just because he has to be different, Councilman John Taylor Chapman all the way in the back. Always one in every crowd, right? Yeah. Former Mayor Allison Silverberg is here as well. Representing Senator Mark Warner, we have AP right here on phone. You're going to hear in a couple minutes from our Commonwealth's attorney, Brian Porter. We also have Sheriff Sean Casey. We have our police chief, Don Hayes. We have Delegate David Beulah. I spied Delegate Beulah from my window earlier doing a lot of work out here to get ready. So hardest working delegate in show business here. So thank you. Wait for the airplane there. We have our city manager, Jim Parajan. We have a number of department heads that are part of this process, and I want to make sure to recognize them. We have the director of our libraries, Rose Dawson, right up front. Director of the Office of Human Rights, Gene Kelleher. Director of the Office of Historic Alexandria, Gretchen Beulah. We have our Race and Social Equity Officer, Jacqueline Tucker. Where are you? There you are. All right. Is there anybody I forgot? Oh, I'm getting to her. Don't worry. We're covered. Thank you. All right. Thank you all very much for being here and being a part of this effort. I do want to begin by thanking our incredible staff who have supported this effort from the beginning. This is not just an assignment that they get at work. This is a passion project for them. And so I do want to recognize Audrey Davis, the incomparable Audrey Davis up front. And again, Gretchen Beulah from OHA for all of your work. You guys do so much incredible work to support this effort. But I do want to recognize our volunteers. We had them rise earlier, but all the folks who have been a part of this Community Remembrance Project from the beginning. This is something that has just kind of continued to snowball as more people get involved and more people get excited about the work that this project is doing. And I want to thank you all for taking up your time and being a part of this, because this is such important work. And it only happens, we have, as I introduced, a huge staff supporting this effort. It's not a huge staff, but you guys are the force multipliers who make this happen. And so thank you so much to all the volunteers of the Community Remembrance Project for the work that you do. This is an important year in this project, as we are going to be taking some very significant steps this year. And we're taking that on the backs of your work. And so thank you so much to all of you. Part of what is so important about what you're doing is that for so long, the history that we have told this city, the history that we have told about the folks that have walked these streets is about important men who have walked these streets. And it's mostly men who we have told throughout our history. And what's so important about this effort is that we are telling the story not only of people of color and women who have been part of our history, but we are also telling the story about evil people who have walked the streets and the complicity that our community has had in that evil as it has occurred. And as Reverend Q said, it's about more than just interpreting this history. It's about the reconciliation, coming to grips with that history that's so important. We've now done this a couple of times. And, every year we come back here, it's not just about acknowledging the history. It's about what we can glean from that history as lessons, instructive lessons for today, for the decisions that we make today, for the issues that we encounter today. And that's why this is so important. Ordinarily when you go to a funeral or an observance for someone who's passed, you're going really for the family. You're going for the family and friends. And unfortunately, nobody here are family and friends of Joseph McCoy. None of you were friends with him or direct family members. We grieve his loss because his loss is one of our Alexandria community. And as Alexandrians, we grieve that loss, and certainly we grieve the circumstances of how it occurred. But we're here because we want to take what we learned in that incident 125 years ago and what we've learned since and turn it into something positive for the future. You know, every year that we do this, I try to find something about the history that I haven't really fully understood and read a little bit more and try to kind of draw some more conclusions about it in my own head. And fortunately, our volunteers, our incredible volunteers in the Community Remembrance Project, every year they continue to learn more and try to refine that history that we have. And you know, this year I focused on the role of the governor, Charles O'Farrell. And you know, if you read the history, you know, this was a former Confederate soldier who began his term as governor in January of 1894. And he, throughout his term, was extremely aggressive in trying to crack down on lynching. He sent folks from the state to different communities all around the Commonwealth when there was even a threat of a potential lynching that would occur to try to prevent that. And in the aftermath of Joseph McCoy's lynching here in Alexandria, he made sure he had folks up here working to investigate what had happened. And he laid the blame on certainly one of my predecessors, the mayor at the time, and laid blame on him, as well as other city officials for allowing this to happen. Which, you know, you read that and you would kind of think, well, you know, here is a governor who is incredibly progressive for his time in kind of looking at these extrajudicial lynchings and trying to prevent them, as well as trying to investigate those who were complicit in them. Obviously, digging in the history a little bit more, you know, would understand that this was a governor who was extremely committed to the rule of law. And right after Joseph McCoy's lynching, there was a writing in the Richmond Planet that wrote about an editorial that was really critical of Alexandria, saying how Alexandria made a colossal mistake by allowing this lynching to occur. That instead, what we should have just allowed to happen is the judicial system would do its thing. He would be quickly convicted, this editorial said, and quickly executed. And so it gives you a little bit more of an insight into what the governor was thinking and what this editorial writer was thinking 125 years ago, that no, we don't need to take to the streets and have a mob that will lynch this young man. We just need to wait, and the justice system will take care of it and execute him quickly. Which I think, as we think about how we look at the lessons of 125 years ago and how they apply today, we look at when a justice system can replicate a mob on the streets, that something's probably wrong. And I think for me this year, that's the lesson I take from the incidents of 125 years ago. That's the part of the history that rings true for me today. I do want to read a proclamation on behalf of my colleagues on the council, and then I'm going to invite up the next speaker. Whereas the events on April 22nd, 1897, when Richard Lacey accused Joseph McCoy, an African-American teenager who had worked for Lacey for 16 years, of sexually assaulting his daughter, McCoy was arrested and he denied the charge. And whereas McCoy was locked in a cell at the Alexandria Police Station House, the current location of Alexandria City Hall, he was interrogated by Lieutenant James Smith, who reported McCoy confessed to the crime despite the earlier denial. And whereas on the evening of April 22nd, a mob attempted to break down the door of the Alexandria Police Station House and were repulsed by the officers on duty. The mayor of Alexandria never took any action after being informed of the first attack, and at 1 a.m. on April 23rd, a second attack overwhelmed the officers at the station house. And whereas Joseph McCoy was pulled from his cell and dragged to the southeast corner of Cameron and Lee Streets, the devastating effects of the assault upon his body were described in a Washington Post article. The body of McCoy was left hanging to the lamppost for 15 minutes before it was cut down. 3 bullet holes were found, 1 in the left shoulder and 2 bullets in the left thigh. The left eye was much swollen. As he was strung to the lamppost, he was struck on the head with a cobblestone. A pool of blood was at the base of the post. And whereas between 1882 and 1968, 100 African-American Virginians, including 11 in Northern Virginia and 2 in Alexandria, were lynched. The lynchings were among 4,743 reported nationwide during the same period. Just 2 years after Joseph McCoy was murdered, 16-year-old Benjamin Thomas was lynched at the southwest corner of King and Fairfax Streets on August 8th, 1899. And whereas the city of Alexandria condemns these acts and apologizes for its lynching history, the city seeks to lay bare past inequities, expose our troubled racial history, and to bear witness to those atrocities. Alexandria is committed to restorative justice, so our community emerges stronger and more inclusive. In this way, the deaths of Joseph McCoy and Benjamin Thomas will never be forgotten. Now, therefore, I, Justin M. Wilson, Mayor of the City of Alexandria, Virginia, and on behalf of the Alexandria City Council, do hereby recognize today, April 23rd, 2022, as a day for us to remember the life, spirit, and legacy exactly 125 years after the death of Joseph McCoy in the city of Alexandria. And I call observance to the attention of all of our citizens that the city of Alexandria shall continue to place the rights of all humanity first and foremost on all occasions, that our city might be an example to all. In witness whereof, I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the city of Alexandria to be affixed this 23rd day of April 2022. At this point, it is my pleasure to introduce someone who, as of last Monday, is now our permanent Chief of Police. I can introduce Don Hayes, Chief of Police.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a deep pleasure to be able to speak before you, to tell you that I am humbled by the appointment and promise to do what I can do to make sure that all people in this city are served justly. And the reason why I say that is because I've been given the assignment of speaking from a law enforcement standpoint on what happened to Joseph McCoy. And what I saw and what I want to tell you is that I like the fact that we are here to remember what took place. Remembering is a good thing. Remembering helps us to understand sometimes the things that we did that were not right. And I remember now, after reading the account of Joseph McCoy, I remember a 19-year-old African-American young man whose life was taken unjustly. Unjustly first because he was arrested unjustly. He was arrested by the Alexandria Police Department without a warrant or any evidence that the crime had even taken place. Arrested unjustly because even when he was put in custody, his life was not preserved under the oath that we took to preserve life and to make sure that everybody has justice in the process. And so I want us to remember on that day that those who actually wore this uniform on that date and time did not do what was right. And so what I want you to do is not only remember, I want you to recognize that there were those in times that wore this uniform that not always did what was right. They did what was unjust. And they did what was unjust because what we had was, at times, a people who wanted an unjust society. And they lived in such a way that all people weren't treated equally. And we have to recognize that, and we have to make amends for that. We have to recognize that this was allowed to happen by people who wanted an unjust society, who had unjust laws, and they used law enforcement as a tool of terror. And we need to recognize that as we remember the life of Joseph McCoy. But we can't just remember, and we can't just recognize. As Pastor Q said, we have to reconcile. We have to be able to reconcile what happened. And if we're going to reconcile it, we must resolve to make sure things like that never happen again. We have to resolve and ensure that the Alexandria Police Department will be made up of men and women who will bring about justice for all. And all means all people, people of all color, all ethnicities, all race, gender, national origin, religion, age. It means all people. It means people must be treated fairly. And that we will do this by ensuring that the right people who wear this uniform are just. This will be done by ensuring that we are hiring and we are training the right people to realize that all people deserve justice. We will do that from this day forth. I, as your chief of police, promise that to you. But more than that, as a person who cares about all life, we have to work together to ensure that this is never forgotten, but it's also never repeated. Thank you again, and God bless you.
Now we will have remarks by the Commonwealth's Attorney, Brian Porter.
Thank you. I consider it an honor and a privilege to be asked to speak this afternoon as we remember and reflect on the violent and disturbing death of Joseph McCoy, who was lynched from a lamppost near this very spot 125 years ago. At first blush, 125 years might seem like a long time, but in the grand scheme of things, it really is just a blink of an eye. 125 years is just outside the longest recorded human lifespan. My father's grandfather, my great-grandfather, was a young adult in 1897. And I am just the 11th Commonwealth's attorney to serve the city since Leonard Marbury, who held my office at the time of Mr. McCoy's murder, and who also played a prominent role in the lynching. In fact, when I was asked to speak today, I was asked to reflect on Mr. Marbury's complicity in the lynching and the lessons that might be learned from that history. And I'll be talking about that in just a second. But I want to remind everybody that when we're considering such a terrible event, 125 years really is not that long at all. And because it's not that long, there are any number of really important lessons that can be learned from Joseph McCoy's unfortunate death. I'd also like to remind everyone that Joseph McCoy was a real, tangible human being. He's someone who laughed and loved and lived. He was born and raised here in Alexandria. He had hopes, he had dreams for the future, and all of those were stolen from him in an instant at the hands and the brutality of an enraged mob. As I prepare my remarks today, three specific historic facts about the lynching drew my attention as a lawyer and as a prosecutor. Three collections of facts, if you will, that made the terrible events of April 23rd, 1897 all the worse. First, I was struck by the fact that an angry mob quickly, in the span of hours, assembled outside of the jail cell where McCoy was being held and collectively decided to serve as the judge, jury, and executioner. And I think that the rapidity with which that event occurred, the quickness with which a mob gathered, and like wildfire, the hatred and anger that spread through that mob to allow the violence, serves as a stark reminder today of what can happen and how vicious human beings can be to one another. An angry mob comprised of Alexandria's white elite, of doctors, of business owners, and even lawyers, surged, seized, and became a vengeful, furious mob usurping the law and committing an unspeakable atrocity. The second lesson is that rage based in hatred of other people leads to unpredictable results. The fear of those who are different, whether the difference be race or religion, ethnicity, has sadly always motivated men to atrocities throughout the span of human history. And a large group of people brought together collectively in a fury of racist resentment are obviously capable of truly terrible actions. But given my position as the Commonwealth's attorney for the city, The third collection of facts is the most chilling. In the McCoy case, as the mayor noted, Alexandria's public officials, to include the mayor, the police, and the Commonwealth's attorney, not only looked the other way as the lynching was being committed, but they were also complicit in its completion. And they compounded their guilt by doing absolutely nothing to bring the perpetrators to justice after Mr. McCoy was murdered. A review of the governor's inquiry into the lynching shows repeated instances of public officials shading the truth, downplaying their role, or downright lying to the investigators about their actions. Alexandria's mayor did not call on the local militia to restore order and protect McCoy. The police stood aside as the angry lynch mob entered the station house. Marbury, the Commonwealth's attorney, did nothing to protect McCoy despite personally observing the large crowd gathering outside of the station. In between the first and second breaching attempt, McCoy's accuser, Richard Lacey, was arrested for inciting the crowd, but the Commonwealth's attorney quickly decided to release him, betraying his sympathy for Lacey. And Marbury then led Lacey away, providing him a convenient alibi for later on when the investigation commenced. Marbury conspired with other public officials, to include the mayor, the police chief, and the commander of the local militia, to cover up the culpability of Alexandria's elites, providing uncorroborated alibis to others under suspicion, and overtly lying to the investigators sent by the governor. He committed obvious untruths in that investigation. For example, Marbury told the investigator that he could not recognize many of the men that were participating in the lynch mob because they had their hats pulled down low, obscuring their features. Numerous contemporary reports belie that assertion, noting that any number of prominent and easily identifiable Alexandrians participated in the mob. And in the end, Marbury did not prosecute a single person for the murder, notwithstanding the fact that he almost certainly had firsthand knowledge of the identity of many of the participants. An editorial from the African-American newspaper, the Richmond Planet, which was referred to by the mayor a few minutes ago, laid bare the treachery of city officials. And I'm quoting from that editorial because I think the words are important. Quote, "The lynching places Alexandria before the world as a city of lawlessness, where public officials disregard their oaths of office and without warrant or excuse suspend the law. This shows that the city's government is rotten to the core," unquote. Those of us who hold public office and who are entrusted by the citizenry to execute their duties impartially and without fear or favor to any person would do well to remember what happened to Joseph McCoy and to be reminded of what havoc occurs when public servants stand by and do nothing in the face of evil. 125 years ago, Joseph McCoy was brutally lynched by a racist mob without the benefit of due process. Perhaps it would be easier to consider and confine this terrible act to the category of ancient history, but it isn't. As we stand here today remembering, and as I prepare my remarks today, I felt and continue to feel shame and grief that my predecessor in office, Mr. Marbury, a man who may have been able to prevent a murder and almost certainly could have done something about the people that had committed the murder after it was done, was complicit in that murder. And while it is far too little and far too late, I hereby officially apologize to Mr. McCoy on the behalf of my office for its failure to do what was right in the moment. Thank you very much. Again, I consider it a privilege to speak to you today, and I'll turn it over now to the next speaker.
Hello, my name is Yani Marie Sangare, and I'm a sophomore at Alexandria City High School. I'm honored to have the opportunity to speak today. 125 years ago, the storm spit out lightning and a black body hanged from a lamppost. 125 years later, the infrastructure has grown poisonous roots that run through the ground I stand on, from the west end to the east. An apology does not rectify the foundational trauma, nor does the acknowledgement in my voice as I give what I have left of my words. A familial history has intertwined our bodies with this land, from Franklin and Armfield's boats that floated to the docks carrying black bodies as cargo, to T.C. Williams' racist superintendent, and the modern-day disparity of the bewildering scarcity of black kids in our TAG and AP classrooms, the deep Potomac running a dirty red. A familial history and our present presence here, now, in this moment, has tied us to this land, and there are no words, no apologies, no statements, and no neutrality that can break those chains when the storm is still brewing, when even now there is acid rain falling on what has transformed from Negro to Black to African American skin. Joseph McCoy's death was a series of what I will not call structural failures, but of the structure working exactly to its intent. The blind eye of the mayor, the half ear of the police, the Commonwealth attorney, and the individuals at the time makes the whole of white supremacy haunt this conversation. 125 years ago, the storm spit out lightning and each cloud was as white as snow. 125 years later, each morning it seems the headlines offer a new Black body bleeding out on the street under the knee of an officer, if not hanging from a tree. Even when it's not here, it's somewhere everywhere, and its roots are the sidewalk on which we stand. He was hanged from a lamppost by a mob hypnotized by the spell of systemic racism that manifested in the bullet holes found in his body. Is that spell yet revoked? He is buried in a pauper's grave, for in its aftermath, what of his family? 125 years later, and we are turning a blind eye to the storm. So I will not hesitate to be radical about my survival, the survival of my family and of my community. I am reaching out for love, but how does love signal nonviolence? How do we resist a legacy of hatred with only peace? How do we tiptoe around the sharp mountains of this legacy? How do we say that it isn't here when it was, when it is? I'm asking this question and I am reaching out for love, but you must understand that at some fundamental level, a body hanging from a lamppost is only rectified when we take down not only that lamppost, but its commissioners. We remember and we reform, but reform does not imply abolition. I repeat, reform does not imply abolition. So I commend the city of Alexandria for its continual efforts to acknowledge the unforgivable and tragic portion of our history. I honor and love both Joseph McCoy and his family, for I have no doubt that his bloodline still flows as deep as the Potomac River. I would love to end this speech with a call to action. I would love to tell you to do something as simple as protest or vote or read an article or check your bias, and I do commend those who take such actions and encourage them. But I'm afraid such an ultimatum of improvement is a naive prayer. I enlist you in this form, remembrance, both in standing here and in walking around this city, in the well-deserved joy and love I hope can come with this rising spring. For in the hot summers of 2020, I remember hatred ran wild and vile on the streets. I remember it not in the resistance, but in its dissidence for the need to change, in its deniers for its necessity here. I enlist your remembrance for in hopes that in knowing we may find love. For what is love if not revolution? Rest in peace, Joseph McCoy. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wilson, Alexandria City Council, Virginia government officials, esteemed faith leaders, Beulah Baptist Church Choir, members of the Alexandria Community Remembrance Project, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone gathered here today. I'm honored to be with you as we mark this solemn occasion. I offer a poem to commemorate the lynching of Joseph McCoy and to lift up his name. It may be stunning to know that it took the US Congress over 122 years and 200 attempts before it passed legislation to make lynching a hate crime, a federal felony. But this is but one of many manifestations of systemic prejudice, discrimination, and racism that continue throughout our society. It's incumbent on us to understand and face such injustice every day and to work to make change. Alexandria has taken a powerful step by choosing to acknowledge our difficult history in a proactive and meaningful way. For my poem, I've chosen to write a villanelle, which is a highly structured poetic form that features repeated lines. These refrains reinforce the words of our remembrance and affirm our need to face just history and seek justice. To bring justice near. A Black man was lynched in our city, here, where a white mob savagely had its way. We must face history, bring justice near. He lived on Alfred Street, age 18 years, grew up when harsh Jim Crow laws ruled the day. A Black man was lynched in our city, here. Together, let's say his name, bear our tears. We lift up Joseph McCoy and we pray, we must face history, bring justice near. The trauma from racial hate is severe, remains till now, unless we change our ways. A Black man was lynched in our city, here. No one was tried for his murder. It's clear that the son of our city was betrayed. We must face history, bring justice near. Let's educate our youth, open eyes, ears, so inhumanity is not replayed. A Black man was lynched in our city, here. We must face history, bring justice near.
To all those persons on the diocese, I'm glad to be here with you on this occasion. And since you've asked a Baptist Methodist preacher, I have chosen a text from the Psalms. Might be familiar to some of you. The words of the 137th Psalm says, "How can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land?" Remind me to answer that question. But from the time Africans came as indentured or enslaved people around 1619, we caught hell. Arriving with the Dutch to New Amsterdam, later called New York, some were manumitted by 1644 and others were granted full manumission in 1827, but only in New York. Yet still, what does it mean to be granted your freedom? If granted, can it be taken away? But did the founding fathers grant freedom to all? The Declaration of Independence states that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But they didn't mean Africans. In fact, in 1857, Supreme Court Justice Roger B. Taney declared on behalf of majority decision in the Dred Scott case that blacks have no rights which the white man was bound to respect, and that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for his benefit. Is this carte blanche to do to blacks as any white person is determined? If so, a very dangerous scenario was alive in the land. How dangerous, you might ask? Between 1890 and 1900, more than 1,600 blacks were lynched by white mobs all over the so-called bastion of freedom. In fact, history tells us that nearly 5,000 victims of brutality in that era, the post-Reconstruction era, by white mobs bent on, quote, keeping the darkies in their place, end quote. No wonder the protest song by Nina Simone, Strange Fruit, caught the imagination of blacks and angered white audiences, even if it was written at the end of the so-called lynching era, 1940. The House of Representatives did manage to put forth an anti-lynching bill in 1922. But President Warren G. Harding refused to push the matter before the U.S. Senate. As a footnote, the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act became federal law on March 29th, 2022. A little late, don't you think? And Alexandria was no exception to the vehement violence. In fact, we gather today to remember a young teenager, Joseph McCoy, a victim of the insanity which swept these shores. It's not to say that lawlessness ruled the land. What it does say is that there were many silent witnesses who either said nothing or did nothing to aid the victims. But there were also organized lynchings where newspapers advertised the upcoming event, so it became a social activity. And although images within the crowd were printed in local newsprint, law enforcement never could identify anyone committing these heinous crimes. To see an injustice and not attempt to prevent it gives credence to the act. So where was the outcry? So we turn to Brother James Russell Lowell, writing during the stench of slavery in America. His epic poem speaks volumes against the injustices facing African Americans. However, he was in the minority, and his words appear to have fallen on deaf ears. But I quote them now. Careless seems the great avenger. History's pages but record one death grapple in the darkness twixt old systems and the word. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scalpel sways the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch of his own. Then to side with truth is noble when we share her wretched crust. Before her cause bring fame and profit, 'tis prosperous to be just. Then it is the brave man chooses, while the coward stands aside. Doubting is his abject spirit till his Lord is crucified, and the multitude make virtue of the faith they had denied. James Russell Lowell, 1819 to 1891. He appears to declare that God was standing by, watching to see if any would side with truth. Those in power didn't. Were they either cowards or timid politicians too afraid to act on the side of truth? Dr. King, speaking in another context, gives us a clear perspective on the matter. He said, cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but one must take it because it's right. So the text before us comes at a time when Israel had been taken captive by the Babylonians. The psalmist is devastated by the chain of events. His beloved Jerusalem has been destroyed, and the leaders have either been killed or taken into captivity. He knows firsthand of the atrocities his people have suffered, and in prayer, he asks for vengeance. He wants the Babylonians to suffer like he has suffered. Can I blame him? No, because it's righteous indignation. But is it right? You tell me. As I stand before you today, I'm appalled that more than a century has passed since this teenager, Joseph McCoy, was murdered. And we're just getting around to passing legislation to make it a crime. One might ask, is this too little, too late? He was arrested without a warrant, dragged from his cell by a mob of over 500 persons, says the Evening Star, then shot multiple times. By the time his body was given an autopsy, his head had been split open by an axe, and his body showed evidence of burn marks. What kind of humans do this to other humans? His family refused to claim the body. The report from the Evening Star, dated April 26, 1897, states that an aunt said, "As the people killed him, let them bury him." Accused of attacking a child of Richard Lacey, whom he worked for, he never had a trial by his peers. Oh yeah, I forgot. Blacks have no rights, which white men are bound to respect. What's a minister to say at a time like this? The original eulogist, the Reverend William H. Gaines, pastor of Roberts Chapel, said, "Those who shed blood shall lose their own." Then carefully he noted, "Mothers, take your sons into your confidence and teach them the higher principles of morality, that there might never again be a repetition of the terrible crimes committed and charged to have been committed." Hear him clearly. That there might never again be a repetition of the terrible crimes, my emphasis. I don't think the 20 black persons in the audience missed what he was saying. They were brave souls to even attend, and I'm certain that they heard what happened to this young man should never, ever happen again. As a follower of Christ, he too was victim of a mob, I agree that it should never, ever happen again. We must remember every atrocity, every dastardly deed perpetrated against humankind by other humans, and find a way to forgive. In that forgiveness, however, is the determination to prevent them from happening again. In my resolve to fight injustice in every form, the words of the Apostle Paul helps me. He says, Therefore, my beloved, be steadfast, immovable, always excelling in the work of the Lord, because you know that in the Lord your work is not in vain. Those of us gathered here today, we are involved in the Lord's work, laboring to make equal justice the law of the land. It's the Lord's work, bringing equity and healing to our land. We must be diligent, steadfast, immovable in our stance against police violence against brown and black people, equally adamant against politicians taking the expedient path when they're writing laws as opposed to the right one. But that's not all. Each of us must wrap ourselves in the concepts of holiness espoused through the Abrahamic traditions, love of neighbor, charity for the poor, and justice for all. Those traditions include Judaism, Islam, Christianity, the Baha'i faith, the Jewish faith, the Samaritans, and the Rastafarians. Our task, those gathered here today and those viewing, must be to become a people on a mission to right all the wrongs in our society, to become the peacemakers during confrontations of hate, to make this American nightmare into a reality where all men and women in these United States are treated as equals, that they are protected by their governments to ensure their rights, that among these are equal access to good representation, an opportunity to be trained for gainful employment, access to good health care and a good education. Then liberty, life, and the pursuit of happiness has the same meaning to the sisters and brothers in the Berg as they do in Beverly Hills, as they do in Chililagua. And that we will, by any means necessary, protect this grand thought and make it a reality for all of us. And all is one of those inclusive terms that leaves no one out. It's not enough to hold someone else accountable. We, each of us, must be accountable to each other because we are our brother's keepers. And the answer to that question that I raised earlier, how can we sing the songs of the Lord in a strange land, in a foreign land, in a land that beats and dehumanizes you? You sing it with someone standing by you. The song says, I've seen the lightning flash, and I've heard the thunder roll. I felt sin's breakers trying to conquer my soul. But I heard the voice of Jesus saying, still try on. He promised never to leave us alone. So when I fight this fight, I know that Jesus is with me. He'll go with me all the way and never forsake me. Why? Because I don't have to walk alone. He promised. He promised never to leave me, never to leave me alone. God bless you.
That's going to be tough to follow. To my Muslim sisters and brothers, I say, Ramadan Mubarak. I wish you a joyful Ramadan. To my Jewish sisters and brothers, I say Shabbat Shalom. And to all who are gathered here today, I stand before you with deep gratitude, with the full awareness that only a very privileged few have the opportunity to stand on this dais to speak today, and with the full understanding that it is the work of many that has made this happen. Over the many years that this Remembrance project has in process through a global pandemic, we have soldiered on with deep gratitude for the many committees, the research committee, the education, the soil and marker, and so many more. Yizkor Elohim. May God remember Joseph McCoy. Nizkor Anachnu. May we remember Joseph McCoy. In the Jewish tradition, it is a custom to leave a stone behind in remembrance of our departed. The heaviness of the stone is something that both weighs down our grief and provides a lasting and an enduring symbol of our remembrance. Our remembrance as we bear witness that Joseph McCoy's life mattered, even as his world and the world of his family was shattered. Yizkor Elohim, may God remember. Nizkor Anachnu, may we remember. As we move to conclude this part of our remembrance this afternoon, each of you are invited to take a stone for yourself. And as we process from here in Market Square, down one block, over one block, and down one block to the corners of Cameron and Lee, I invite you to carry that stone and to consider the weight of that stone, to consider the weight of history, the weight of legacy, the weight of our responsibility. Once we arrive at our destination, you are invited to leave the stone behind with a blessing, with a commitment at a light post on the corner of Cameron and Lee. We will be led in our procession by the living legend, Mr. MacArthur Myers, WPM Worshipful Grand Historian, Universal Lodge, number 1.
When we still can't acknowledge there are transgendered women and girls, and we refuse to say the word or to acknowledge that they are women. In the words of the Savior in the Christian tradition, Jesus, as he was talking with his followers, and not just to his followers, but to all. I wish I could, as our dear young sister, Yanine Marie, has already echoed, issue you a charge. I wish I could remind you the importance of an election that is coming up this November and in 2 additional years, if my math is correct. I wish I could leave you with some call to action. But I will simply leave you with the words of that dying prophet. The words set forth and going forth particularly to my white brothers and sisters. Go in peace and sin against humanity no more. This concludes our service. You may now leave your stones at the lynching site and go in silence. Peace be with you all.